get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Expert Talks Online. I'm Lisa Copeland, Senior Vice President of Client Engagement here at Equal Experts. This evening is the sixth and final session in our summer series where we've been covering a diverse range of topics. Tonight, we're going to explore, so you want to onboard a DevOps practitioner. This talks about the ways that you can bootstrap your environments for success and attract and retain people to work on them. We're very excited to welcome Martin Jackson, our DevOps engineer extraordinaire here at Equal Experts, who's going to walk us through this interesting topic. And then after, we will have a fishbowl with Adam Hansrod and Andy Singleton, both from Equal Experts. A little bit about the meeting protocols. You can start adding your questions now using the Zoom Q&A function. We'll be answering the top voted questions, so keep an eye on what questions are being added and vote for those you'd like to see cover. Now I'm going to hand it over to Martin. Take it away.
Okay, it's the first time I've done this, so be gentle, because if not, I'll
Always.
Okay, so presentation. So you want to onboard a DevOps practitioner. Okay, so who am I? My name is Martin Jackson, also colloquially known as Action Jack. I've been in the DevOps field for about just over 10 years. Jeez, I feel old. I've been engaged on and off with Equal Experts for about 8 years as a DevOps consultant, and I'm currently at HMRC as a platform engineer for Equal Experts. Okay, so what is this talk about? Well, I've worked across multiple short-term engagements, some for Equal Experts, some for some other consultancies. I found the process of onboarding and helping people get up to speed to be somewhat lacking. This presentation is about some of the things that I have found have really helped to actually get people up to speed and continue to deliver dividends on it. Okay, so one of the key drivers to make things better for onboarding individuals is based on simplification. And this simplification has to be an ongoing process. Time should really be invested to reduce the time spent in learning environments by building to be easy to understand, with a focus on making it possible for every developer, whether new or old, to become effective in the shortest possible amount of time. Okay, the basics. Some of the basic requirements include: has internet access been sorted out for new starters? Or have you let them know that there isn't any internet access? Because then we can always provide our own. Is there locker access? I.e., do you supply locker for hot desk environments? Have you let security know they're actually coming? I have actually sat inside a reception for about 4 hours, waiting for people to let me in. Have you let people know if they're required to use their own equipment or they've been supplied with specified equipment? And what's the operating system they're going to be using? This sort of thing does matter. And if you haven't already done so, have you adopted some sort of group chat software like Slack or Microsoft Teams or Rocket Chat? This type of software is really beneficial and helps reduce the pressure on key individuals, because your questions can go out to a group of people rather than target a specified individual who may be busy or under constant interruption. Now, and if you do use tools like that, do you have some sort of communications etiquette? For example, when you answer somebody, do you create the answer in a thread so that the answer is not littered across the entire channel? And also they could be referenced later on. And also, have you provided you start with a high level environment overview so that you know what you're working on and what the technologies we need to be getting up to speed on beforehand, rather than just you'll be working on Puppet or Ansible or Kubernetes. It'd be nice to know exactly sort of the environment you're working on so that you actually have a chance to actually get a decent heads up. Culture. For culture, I like to embrace the standard of the humble learner. The humble learner seeks to accept the limits of human capacity while seeking to grow their own technical skills as well as empathetic skills. You can do this by not creating or fostering a blame, shame, and training culture where mistakes are handled by openly blaming and shaming the individual, and sometimes terminating their employment. And then you could train other, so sometimes, in blame, shame environments, they typically blame somebody else when the mistake's been made, and then they use that employees an example why you should never make that mistake again. See, this does not help anybody. It literally just breeds a culture of fear where you're scared to actually touch things. Also, try to foster a culture of improvement by benchmarking your organization against some sort of maturity model so you can identify the gaps and attempt to close them. Like key ones are like the DevOps maturity models. There's quite a few of them around. There's some older ones like COBIT or CMMI. And I suggest you refer to those so that you actually can judge how well you're actually doing in terms of your DevOps expertise and on your journey as well, so you can make things better for yourselves culturally. Next, I'll say introduce new engineers to the relevant people in the organization, so that you actually know certain key people that you can actually walk up to and say, hey, how do you do this? Or you're responsible for that. Not too many people, I might add, but just a few people initially. Key thing is also to remember, not everybody is as smart as you are. They may be missing like context of the environment, situational awareness. How did we get from here to there? Tribal knowledge, where the bodies are buried, cultural awareness, how we do things around here, technical expertise in that specific problem domain, or even what's the local taxonomy. Certain languages aren't transferable between engagements, i.e. what some people say means something completely different, i.e. what a pre-approved change means may be something completely different from engagement to engagement or environment to environment. Also, what are the preferred practices or design principles? Also, another key thing, when a new person joins, listen to their point of view. Bringing in a new person is a prime opportunity to find out where the code and processes need the improvement. Now, don't just say, hey, they've just come in, just deal with it. Bring them in, listen to what they're saying. Sometimes it adds a lot of sense and objectivity. Test your mentoring and onboarding process to constantly flush out any shortfalls by getting the last person who joined to mentor the new joiner. So the last person gets dragged in to actually bring the new person on board, and that can make things really highlight some shortfalls in the process. Also, make your documentation inclusive so that so you can catch insensitive and inconsiderate writing. In fact, this presentation was passed using a tool called Alex to catch any sort of insensitive language. So hopefully it shouldn't offend anybody. Back to another point was be wary of not overloading new starts with too much information. Now, when you first join, it is a scary process, and meeting lots of new people and try and remember names, and I'm terrible with names, try and remember so many names is really difficult, and it can really stress people out. So probably the better thing is to give them a useful set of links to where people can research things and people at their own pace. And another key thing is to write code that takes into account how future maintainers will feel reading it. Let your code be empathetic. Don't do this code where you literally, people sit there, read it and think, what does this mean? You know, write your code and think about how people in the future are going to deal with it, how they're going to feel about it, how it's not, make sure it's not obfuscated. Ooh, next slide. Here we go. Documentation. I think it's really important to either have or do the following. Regularly tidy up your documentation. Old documents should be removed. Outdated ones should be updated. If you touch a piece of documentation which is out of date, update it. Also, consolidate your documentation. Nothing's more disheartening than searching for your wiki for the words password management policy and 40 search results come up. That is really, really irritating and unnerving. Also, make sure you have some high-level logical architecture of what you're working on. I know it can be difficult in large environments, but even a brief sort of high-level overview of just clouds is really helpful to try and get some sort of visibility about what is actually going on. An overview of the company's infrastructure kind of helps as well. Sometimes it's easy because you've got Amazon, so you say, hey, there's my infrastructure, right? But then sometimes having just a high-level logical architecture can really help. Overview of the company's infrastructure system. The company's infrastructure also helps as well. System integration points and their third-party dependencies. Sometimes you've got some dependencies on some legacy environments like UK Cloud, sorry, internal joke there, which you are not typically aware of because you haven't fully migrated over to another environment. But it is nice to have those sort of documentation available so that you don't have those gotchas. Also, I found that intranets, wikis, or enterprise social networks really help you learn about different teams and key members, especially if you have those with pictures, so you can actually walk around and say, hey, that guy looks like that, rather than try to figure out who the voice when you're walking around saying, oh, where's John Smith, and you don't know what he looks like. Sometimes pictures do help. Another one which I found is really, really useful is if you're using tools like PagerDuty, it is really useful to have documentation about your alerts, especially if they're built into the alert. You get an alert and it's got a link to the actual run book. That can really pay back massive dividends, especially for new starts. So you get an alert. What's this alert about? Oh, look, there's a run book which says this is basically what you do. You either like run X, do Y, or shutter the service, or things like this. So at the moment, I'm working on a massive initiative where we're making sure that all our alerts are linked to a runbook entry. And those are really, really helpful, especially for new starters. So you're not, when you get an alert, you're not immediately petrified about what you're going to walk into. Another useful thing is to create a glossary of terms, i.e. a little mini Wikipedia, or a little minipedia, as I call them, which tells you basically what the organization's acronyms are, i.e. when you walk into, so sometimes you'll be working into things and you've got things like heads of duty and thinking, what's the head of duty? I have not got a clue what head of duty is. And it took me 3 months to find out what head of duty was. That's an internal one, because it's got a slightly different meaning depending on the actual context. But one cool thing I've really seen is that acronym decoder chatbot, where you type in the acronym and Slack will come back and say, hey, this acronym means this. And you're like, oh, thank God for that, because now I know what people are talking about, because not everybody can understand what's going on. And sometimes it takes too much time to actually dig that out of your wiki and explain to people in real time what your actual thing is. And sometimes you don't even know what it is. You go, oh, yeah, it's this term I use. I don't even know what it means. So these things happen. Next, I'll say this one is one I really truly love. Pardon me. Write your documentation as if it's going to be open to public scrutiny one day. Literally write your documentation as if your mother's going to read it. So if you write your documentation like that, you're more likely to be more inclusive about it, and it also be more likely to be more sensitive and actually more descriptive about what you're writing about. Also, another useful thing is to have a easy to use and set up collection of shared resources for new joiners, i.e. like bookmark URLs and links, or SH config files and repos, so you can just check that out and import them and get yourself up and running quickly as possible. So you don't have to spend weeks trying to copy bits of config from other people, trying to get the right links to tooling. We've started this, and I found it's really helpful to actually have a repo, an onboarding repo, where you check it out, import your settings, get yourself up and running as quickly as possible, rather than try and find who's got the right config to get you up and running. And if possible, keep your documentation as close to the code as possible, possibly using Markdown or some other static site generator, so you can actually generate your config locally and check it out and just read it directly. And another thing I found really useful is if you've got problems that you're working around your code, it's quite useful to have what I call architectural decision records in your code, where you've actually written down why you made certain decisions and the repercussions of certain decisions, and and how they were agreed on, so that when new people come in and they see something which doesn't quite make sense, sometimes it's really nice to actually understand why that decision was made, so that you can actually reason about how you can make things better, or how you can actually carry on with that existing pattern which was agreed. Also, a good thing is very expressive, if you could be as expressive as possible in your Git commits or in your documentation, so that you can actually understand why something was made. Because an example was I was at an engagement where it documented an instance type, and it goes, oh, we use the M4.4x large Amazon instance type. And as a comment to the code, it went, larger than this causes issues with our AMIs. Didn't say what issues, didn't put a reference in where what the issues were. What would have been more helpful if it said, larger than this causes issues, see this Jira ticket, which references it, or in the actual commit of the code, it says why. And I actually managed to track it down, and the person actually did that said, oh yeah, that's not a problem anymore. I thought, it's in the code. It would have been nice if you actually referenced that, and then it would have been easy to reference afterwards, the reason why. But that's an example. It would be just nice to actually focus on making documentation easy for human beings to read. Now, operations, making it easy to get stuff done. Now, good thing to start with is have your relevant user accounts and access set up and ready to go from when you actually arrive. Another example is creating operations checklists for your key processes, so new people can go and read things, or existing people can go and look at and find out how things are done. I don't know about most people. I have limited brain capacity these days. I'm getting older. My brain is shrinking. It's got too much junk in it, and I'm having trouble getting more stuff into it. So operations checklists do actually help. Also, having your work structured so people can see what needs to be done, i.e. Kanban backboard backlogs or to-do lists. Providing information regarding the applications that are maintained by the team and how to do operations on those applications also helps. And having safe to deploy sample dummy applications that can be deployed safely for your infrastructure, so that new starts can learn how to deploy across, how the deployment process works across your infrastructure without fear of impacting key applications is also handy. Now, a sample app which you could deploy, say, hey, how do we deploy things? Deploy the sample app. Oh, cool. Well, then you deploy that, and then you don't have so much fear deploying something which actually is meaningful, especially if you keep the process the same. So I like to say is like, make it difficult to make mistakes. Make it really difficult to make a mistake in your infrastructure, i.e. examples are using protected branches in your Git infrastructure, so that basically you can't accidentally force push to master, like blocking, like basically breaking changes. Having code standards where you don't just document, and if you have code standards, don't just document them, back them up with automated code standards triggered by your continuous integration tools checks or pre-commit hooks. So basically when you actually try to commit something which is possibly not quite up to par, you get a warning that says, hey, this is not up to par, before you can merge the code. And you also can do those sort of checks to avoid, have checks to ensure that people avoid committing secrets and credentials to their Git repositories. There's multiple tools around this. I've used a few of them to make sure that you actually catch people accidentally committing things which shouldn't be leaked out. And they are dead useful, so that you actually make sure that when you're coming in, you don't accidentally push things. If you have policies on, also if you have policies to handle certain tasks, i.e. doing spikes, document them and link them to your story. So this is a spike story that you're doing. It's a bit of research. Here's a link to how we handle spikes. So if you're a new person, you come in and go, okay, this is a spike, I'm not too sure, let me click on this link. Oh, this is the process that we do spikes. They typically might be time boxed. They may require you actually do a specific environment. There may be some documentation regarding how you actually transition a spike into a working code, if you actually done all the work that's required to actually transition that spike. So that sort of thing really helps. Another key thing which is near and dear to my heart is to ensure your naming conventions are consistent and make sense. If you do something and it's called build X, make sure it actually builds X. If it actually deploys X, that's really confusing. So this comes down to your CI one, where it goes build tool X, and you're thinking, okay, I'm building tool X. It goes, no, that deploys it. well, that doesn't make any logical sense in my head. So ideally, rename it if possible to prevent information hiding. I just want to stop there quickly there because I know my counter reset back and I don't know how I'm doing for time. Oh, no, 24. Bloody, oh, sorry. Don't want to swear. Okay. There we go. Also, if your infrastructure make sure your infrastructure naming is consistent. If your name is consistent, make sure you've got things like, if your environment is called Acme Bomb, it's nice to have your development called Development Acme Bomb, test environment called Test Acme Bomb, pre-production Acme Bomb, or staging Acme Bomb, and production Acme Bomb, rather than really weird names or names of people's pets, which I've come across, which is a bit weird, but I'm sure it made sense to somebody. And back to the bit about making things safe. Nobody should be able to do something catastrophic to environment unless they are really determined to do so. So make it easy to do the right things by creating test harnesses which use scripting tools to actually do things, i.e. using bash scripts or Gradle scripts or make files to actually build environments and test them, i.e. make test, make deploy, and those things are used to do those things rather than manually hacking around the environments. If you use configuration management tools, then use them repeatedly and test them, and try to avoid one-shot configuration management. If the operation is only done once to configure one thing, well, make sure you actually still script it so if it ever happens again, make sure that you actually got let's go back to it. If you do one-shot operations, make sure you still script them. So if that one-shot operation ever needs to be run again, which typically it does, in case something goes wrong, make sure it's in there, it's vetted, it's reviewed. Also, useful thing is to use what I call the guardrail pattern by putting safe conditionals into your configuration management tools, so that when you run them by default, you have to actually tell them to actually do something. So they run it in effect in a dry mode initially. So if you run it, it's a dry run mode. And then you have to say, do bad thing, to basically flag do bad thing if you really want to do it. But if you run it normally, then it will just run and tell you what would have happened. Okay, excellent. Processes. Okay, everyone seems to have their own particular spin on Agile or Kanban. So explain up front what the processes are to new starts and make sure they're refined if necessary. And when you first start, make sure you have, try to have some shovel-ready work for new starters. Create a backlog of work which can be easily done by a new starter, ideally work which is well-defined, easily explained, requires a little bit of research, adds value, and is not grunt work like documentation. Nothing's more depressing when you start somebody says, hey, here's some documentation you need to do. Assign your new starter an onboarding buddy who will mentor them through the entire process, and make sure your buddy is actually free to actually do buddying rather than be stuck with doing other work. It should be dedicated to new starts so that they can actually get themselves up and running, get the environments configured, get that first piece of work done, and ensure that this buddy is available to peer as soon as often as possible, depending on the complexity of the environment, because this could go on for weeks, if not months sometimes. Another thing regarding the processes, when you do retros, try to base your retros against a known good baseline. If you're doing production and deploys in the early hours of the morning, that is not necessarily a good pattern. You should possibly try and say, okay, what can we do to bring that forward so we're not doing production deploys in the middle of the morning? Let's base it on the fact that yes, it went successfully, but our known good one or ideal is to do it in the middle of the day. What would it take to actually get us from there to here? And also, if you're working on stories and tasks, put as much detail as possible into new stories, i.e. the assumptions, the reference implementation, existing implementations. Try and narrow down the acceptance criteria as much as possible to prevent unnecessary research or rework, and add some diagrams if possible. I know it sounds like a lot of work up front, but this can make things really, really useful, especially if you make your stories and tasks as small and as atomic as possible, so that it makes it easy to get things easy to handle the context in your head and actually get the story done, so you get a cycle time reduction. And if possible, avoid doing onboarding during crunch times, because that doesn't do anybody any favors. Okay, I'm running slightly over, so I probably need to drag some time in, so I'm going to move on to version control management. So how do you safely do the things? So ensure that you document your coding standards and strategies in the open, so that people know what your version control and branch strategy is, your code review process, your release handling management process. If possible, have up-to-date readmes in every repo, if not in every section of the repository. And if possible, have sequence diagrams, architectural decision records, which I mentioned earlier. Have a clear and concise Git history that clearly and easily documents the changes that were done and the reasons why the changes were done. If possible, make pull requests a first-class citizen, because nothing's more demoralizing than having a pull request sitting outstanding without feedback for days, especially when you have to rework it and be continuously rebasing it. Also, good pull request can be an excellent teaching tool for new and old people. So basically going back for your old pull request can show you why things were done and help you pass things the same way. And if you're using Slack or something similar, consider adding a notification bot for pull requests. So when actually a pull request is outstanding, a bot pops up and says, hey, it's a pull request. Because basically you want to keep your pull requests short and tidy and merge good pull requests as quickly as possible and close poor ones as fast as possible as well. And I'm probably going to skip to the next slide. Here we go. Development environments. Development environments are a subject near and dear to my heart. Okay. Make it easy to set up a local development environment or environment where you can actually do some development on safely, so you can actually start some work and actually let it be have a also have actually a minimally function. You always have at least a minimally functioning continuous integration setup. I've been places where we didn't have any CI at all, and we were well into the development process, and people just running changes from their local laptops, and it was not a safe environment to actually make changes to. And make your tooling as easy to set up as possible. And not actually mess up your own local machines. So if possible, use virtual management like ASDF, PyEnv, JEnv, RBEnv, ideally Docker or Vagrant Box to actually make some changes. Or even better, if you can, allow you to have your own personalized AWS environment. That can be a bit pricey, but it is really nice to have easy to create and throw away cloud environments if you can do them. Oh, crumbs, there we go. Well, I'm at the end. I've provided a useful link, which should be really, really simple. This is bit.ly.onboard DevOps, which is actually the repo, which has got a lot more detail in there. I had to skip a few things, so I was running a bit over, but hopefully that's a link to everything and fully open to good. It's licensed under the Creative Commons license. Thank you to Ali for making me do that. And feel free to fork it, raise issues, and submit pull requests. And there you go.
I thank you, Martin, our AKA Action Jackson. I love your energy. You make me kind of want to run a marathon and fight for world peace with your Wakanda in the background. So let us move on to our Fishbowl section. So we're going to welcome Adam, Andy, and Ali. And if we call you Action, we have the A's all present and ready for some questions. So unmute yourselves and let's take the first question from Ben. Thank you, Ben, for your question. There's a little context before, so I'll read that. I consider many of the aspects discussed as an essential hygiene that presented during recruitment would lead a candidate to want to work in the organization. maybe a little disillusionment. What approach would you take when hiring to ensure a starter is not missold when the maturity isn't at the desirable level?
Unfortunately, the best thing to do is to be honest, and be honest where you are and where you want to get to. If you are going to, if you're stuck at a specific maturity and you're not willing to shift, be honest, because nothing is more disheartening when you just join and you're not where you said you were going to be, and your technologies were not literally put the decision in their hands to actually work there or not. Because if you work there, you may muddy the waters forever for that employee. The employee may go there, be really disheartened, and may never want to work for your consultancy or your company ever again because they feel they've been misled.
Yeah, I think that's pretty true, actually. I have seen people who have done this, and you tend to see a sort of simmering anger as they realize the situation that they've got themselves into. And it's not a good situation for anybody. So I think I really agree. You've got to be honest about where your team is at and the constraints that it's under. And that, it does include, what the level of maturity is. So
I think
otherwise you just have lots of angry conversations.
Definitely. I think it's definitely one thing as well. It shows that you know that where you are is not right if you're pointing out that we want to be in a certain place. And I think it's a very different team to kind of come into where they don't know the issues that they've got versus they know the issues and they're working on it.
Are there any motivating tricks? Like, so you find yourself in the land of disillusionment, perhaps for a short term, but you're on a journey to get to a better place. Like, are there ways from motivation that you can help?
I think if you are actually actively working on things, and actually when you touch something, you're actively improving, and you're actually stopping saying, we call it Boy Scouting. You go into it, you touch it on, because I'm making things better as I'm going along, and people accept the fact you are making things better, and there is an allowance for it. If you've got an allowance to make things better, and people are willing to accept it and say, hey, this is making things better, and we acknowledge that to be the case, that helps deal with some of the disillusionment, because you're going, okay, I'm refactoring this, reworking it, I am making things better, I'm making the world a better place. And sometimes it takes sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's like, oh, it could take weeks, sometimes months work. Sometimes you'll touch a piece of code and it explodes into a spiral of this morass of things. But if you're allowed to actually make things better, and you actually can look back and say, I know that was painful, but it made the world a better place. That helps. That definitely helps, because you go, okay, well, I've shown the proof that we actually are willing to actually move forward, especially when other people buy into it. When, okay, we know this takes a long time, but we know this needs to be done, and this is a better way forward.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
I think this speaks to a slightly bigger issue, which is, I think, sort of DevOps practitioners and the sort of the approach philosophy. It's relatively new, right, compared to a lot of sort of traditional development techniques. And so the idea around that being product thinking, while, that's sort of taking over a lot of, service development, all that, it's even earlier in its sort of, in being established, where, platforms, et cetera, are involved, and infrastructure is involved. So I think getting people to buy into having high product quality, even in this space, becomes really important.
Thank you.
I also agree. One thing I've noticed a lot as well, that as a lot of new entrants come into the field, a lot of the old lessons which got us here, have been forgotten or neglected. Nobody's actually got back to reading like the old reasons why we did that, like operations as a secret source and John Oswald's planning and DevOps things. They go, oh, I've gone on that AWS certification. It's a bit of mini rant. I've got my AWS certification, therefore I've got all the DevOps. Okay, have you actually read why we did things the way we do it? Have you actually reviewed like old code practices, the Gang of Four, basically those sort of things? Because those add value. It's a relatively new discipline, but there is plenty of legacy work in there, which should be reviewed and researched because it's still valid to this day.
Excellent. And from Susa N, wanting some clarification, can I double check? DevOps is short for development ops and is the main premise of DevOps to organize effectively to avoid failure?
This is where this feels like there'd be dragons. So that's a question. I can suppose it's development operations, i.e. the breaking down of silos between development operations, i.e. making sure that you can get a simple change into production as rapidly as possible in a well-tested manner, which lowers risk and increases delivery confidence, release confidence.
I think that second question there around organizing effectively to avoid failure, I wouldn't say it's to avoid failure. I think it's more that the quality of the thing being released is higher and people are prepared for when it fails and are able to react quicker. So kind of reducing that time of it could potentially fail out there, rather than kind of trying to avoid every failure in the world, which quickly becomes kind of an unachievable task.
Well, we rely on failure, right? You kind of fail to learn. Read that the right way, not fail to learn. With every failure, we learn.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. I know in my early days, about maybe like 7 years ago, before it was as formal, I would call it the update all, right? That you're doing it when you sleep, and then all these things are being put out in the world, and some of them work and some of them don't, and that's not the point. It's the fact that you can, with confidence, put things out there, and you can quickly evolve it where your customers are going as well. Let's see, we have a question from before the talk. I have a new hire who is turning up in 2 days. The basics of access, laptops, accounts are ready for them. What should I prioritize in those 2 days to ensure they have a good onboarding experience?
This is back to the first slides. Actually, I can slip back to the first slide. Let's make sure the basics are sorted out. Let's scroll back there. Now, basically, have they got internet access? Have their lockers been sorted out if they need? So, have their environments? Have they got a repo they could check out so they could quickly set up? Have they got onboarding buddy to pair with them? Can they actually get some work done initially? Can they add value very quickly from day one? Now, do they need to wait on anything? That's the key thing, is that do they need to wait on anything, or do they need access to something critical in order to get to add value? Because nothing's worse than sitting around for the first week or so waiting for things. I've been in places where I've had to literally wait 3 weeks for a laptop. I couldn't use my own laptop. I was given a security laptop and I had to wait 3 weeks for it. And nothing's more disheartening than sitting there getting paid. I got paid, so that was cool. but waiting for your laptop and thinking, I'm sitting here, feel like I'm wasting your money, when you could have just literally told me to come later on, or giving me some stuff to research, or giving me a test environment to work on. I
think there's something else that I think if you're starting up and you're sort of someone sort of preparing stuff for you as a new arrival to sort of get there, I think something that's sometimes useful is for pre-booking sessions with people who are interesting for the role that you're playing. So whether that's like specific key stakeholders, or booking in time for like casual conversations with people like tech or delivery leads. I find that's quite a useful thing that you can do up front, just to make sure that people have that time to make sure they can spend the time with you as a new sort of DevOps practitioner, and you can spend time sort of aligning your expectations with theirs and make sure everyone's on the same page. So that's something I value. Also, walking through architecture is quite handy as well, which is really helpful, because you're sitting there going, okay, this is it. I think it's okay, it's good as long as architecture is not massive, because it could be like, whoa, this is really confusing. I can't get my head around it. Sure. The other side of that, of course, I guess the worst thing that I think you could do in onboarding is to do something along the lines of, here's Confluence, go and learn things, come back when you're ready. And I have been told this personally. That was my onboarding experience, not an EE gig, I will hasten to add. So yeah, stuff like that does happen as well.
Yeah, I've been there. Go and look at our Wikipedia and dig through it, and everything's in there. And you go, whoa, wait a minute, this is all out of date. What's going on here?
Well, I guess there's no structure in that situation.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's onboarding as self-service. That's an indicator of the company as well, right? With the value that they're putting into that process. Adam, did you want to chime in? Okay. Let's see. We have one from Caroline. In the olden days, and I fear what olden means, it's all relative to different people, we address things like this by adopting standards and methodologies like coding standards and peer reviews. It meant moving from one team to the next could be done with a little onboarding. Is that a viable approach in a DevOps environment? What standards can be used?
It's a perfectly viable approach. It's not, DevOps never threw everything out. It didn't throw everything out with the dishwater. It's tried to keep the best parts about things. It really depends on the team and how they work together, and also the process, like peer reviews. Some people, it's still contentious where I work, where basically you work, well, sometimes we work as peers, and then you either review the peer between yourselves, or you submit it to a third party for peer review. And sometimes getting that sort of review is very tricky. It really depends. It requires, I think, open negotiation and talking and agreement on what needs to be done. Ali knows I've got my sort of views on peering and code reviews and how it should work, and I'm kind of a bit stuck in the mud over some of them. But I think go with what works, take what works, discard which doesn't, continuously review, continuously refine.
I think the other part there is around kind of I guess reducing the onboarding between teams. If you're already in an organization and moving around, I think that kind of effort needs to be put into making sure that teams are all working in very similar ways, but maybe not exactly, to avoid everything kind of becoming very cookie cutter. So using the similar sort of tools and practices is really important to help reduce that kind of learning curve as you switch teams or context switch.
Yeah, also using tooling to actually help with that sort of things. You can use tooling to do linting to guarantee some degree of code quality, just generically across the board.
I think, yeah, to Caroline's point, I think this is a pretty handy question. I think the idea is, as we move to a more sort of programmable everything, right? Our pipelines are expressible in code, our infrastructure is expressible in code. But I think coding standards and reviews of it, whether it's automated or whatever, everything becomes ever more important, right? Because at this point, errors and all that actually result in you provisioning things or deploying things you don't want to do. So I think it's not necessarily the case that everything has to be a pull request. Sure, trunk-based is possible, but the point there is that teams need to sort of agree and understand that there needs to be some sort of established process. Whether that's it shouldn't be set in stone, as Martin said, but I think it's useful to have it expressed and reviewed.
Oh, I remember a situation where a missing new line caused me 2 hours worth of work to try and figure out what was going wrong with the code, because a new line wasn't in a piece of code. The fun we had.
We've all been there.
The fun we had. Oh yeah.
And we continue to have fun. Another question that came in before the talk: what actions can you take in the face of a poor or non-existent onboarding process?
We should create one. Start from when you get a new start one. And then when I first came on board, I started creating one from the get-go, because I thought, I don't want to do this again. This is, I think somebody has to take the method and get on and just crack on and get it done. Because it's one of the things where if you don't do it, you just get pain, and it's going to just get more painful every time. Your infrastructure is not going to get any less complicated. I've never known the infrastructure get less complicated over time.
I mean, which do you think is worse, Martin, though, having no onboarding process or having a really bad one?
this kind of, there's the sort of like inconsistent consistency and the consistent consistency. Consistent inconsistency. I think having something gives you something to start with. In fact, having nothing also gives you a nice place to start from as well.
I suppose, I mean, if you've got nothing, though, it's going to take a bit more effort and a bit more manual sort of time from whoever your buddy is, I guess, because you're going to take a bit of an unstructured journey through the onboarding process. And presuming that it's a different person onboarding the next person, I'm sort of guessing they'll have very different experiences if you still don't have an onboarding process by that point.
I see. To be honest, I've been in environments where people have literally come and just left just like that because the onboarding process was so poor. They're like going, you know what? I've been here. I've been here 2 weeks, and I've done nothing. I'm leaving. And I remember I was at a consultancy, and the onboarding process was not great. But I got dragged off by the consultancy onto another assignment because I had skills in that assignment. But somebody forgot to tell the current client, and they thought I'd walked off. They thought I'd left, and they went. I came back the next day and went, "Oh, we thought you left." Okay, well, we show because it had happened before.
Excellent.
I think if this is we've got a poor or non-existent onboarding process and we've got someone turning up in the next week, what do I do? I think going back to kind of Martin's point about getting a buddy is probably a really good point, and then documenting everything that you do during your kind of onboarding of that new person. And that's going to give you something to start with if you have nothing. If you have something poor, then, you know, going through with that buddy and just ripping everything to pieces and rewriting things as you need. And making sure that time gets spent to improve it. Because I think one of the big things I've taken away from Martin's talk is definitely like, you know, the more you invest in this kind of stuff, the easier everything is going to become. Reducing that onboarding curve is really important.
It seems indicative of a capabilities gap that you say, hey, I need this capability to come into my organization. So how can you tease in what you know that you need and then effortlessly make it part of your onboarding process? Like, you may have some of the work done by looking backwards about how you said that we need this capability.
The only way you can really test it, there's 2 ways you can test it. First of all, you can test it on how hard is it for existing people to get the work done, and also when new people come on board as well. Like, it could be, funny enough, you can run into issues where basically when somebody gets a new laptop, it could be unbelievably painful to get themselves up and running. And then you go, okay, that's where you could also go back to your onboarding thing and say, okay, I need to address this. Because if that actually happens recently, somebody used actually 2 people's laptops went, and they've got to have to reset their laptops up, and found out that it's been very difficult because somebody goes, how does this work? How did this tooling work? And I was like going, well, I don't know. It just works for me. It works on my laptop. And after some digging, found out the reason why is because I'd done a couple of things before, and 2 things just happened to work together magically. And it was just basically purely by luck my environment was working.
We all need a little bit of luck sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, we have 2 more questions left. Let's see if we can do a wrap in time. A question from before the talk. What can you learn about your process from people who have recently onboarded? Interesting.
I would think the thing I would probably learn most from someone who's recently onboarded is like, where is the tech debt and where is the kind of holes in knowledge of the team? If it's hard to onboard someone because like something magical happens, then it's probably we haven't spent enough time to work out how that should properly work together, and probably kind of represent somewhere we need kind of as a team make sure we shore up.
Yeah, for me personally, I'd say we need to do more tooling on our local development environments so that they're less problematic. either easy to set up and don't require as much effort, and do not pollute your local laptop with tooling that and mess up settings that you already have. We need to do a lot more work around that.
I think when I've had follow-up sessions with people about onboarding processes in the past, it's usually been you wait a little bit of time so they can sort of look back, and then you say, okay, did your expectations during the onboarding process, did your experiences match what they do now, essentially? I think the important thing for me is wait a bit of time so they've got a realistic view of where they are and where they are in the team now after it's entirely done, the whole process is done, and then look back and say, was it easy? Or what could we have done better? But I think asking someone 2 days after an initial flurry of onboarding tasks is not so worthwhile.
Okay, and final question of the evening. What are wikis, intranets good for versus having docs next to code from an onboarding information radiation perspective?
Well, I think wikis and a great place if you want to send documentation somewhere to die. I think if you want to send them somewhere, just say, hey, off onto the wasteland and wander there till you drop dead. That's a perfect place for wikis. Having it close to code means when you actually update the code, you are, as part of the code review, you're more inclined to actually see that the documentation needs to be updated as well. Because you're updating, if you're updating, you say, okay, I'm updating that piece of how this works. Have I update, and somebody reviews it, they go, well, you've updated this way this works, but you haven't updated the actual documentation with it. It can be literally part of your review. And reviewing, I know lots of people go, oh, go and check the wiki page. Typically, the wiki page is the last place which gets updated.
I think I have a slightly different view to Martin here, is that I think having docs and code that are relevant to the code, so like architectural decision records, whatever, having them kind of co-located with the code is really important, as kind of your consumer of that information is going to be a developer or an engineer in some form. I think there's definitely other types of information that might be more useful for a wiki intranet where you may not have as a kind of technical audience who are going to read it, where it's things like, you know, what are the acronyms that are being used here in this company kind of thing, or what are the TLAs kind of stuff, where it might be harder for those who don't necessarily have that kind of technical background or skill or experience to go and find that in the code and then work backward from there. But I guess to me, it's kind of who are you writing that kind of documentation for, or that information for, and then kind of putting that in a relevant place. But I do completely agree that I've seen a lot of stuff die in wikis and intranets because people write it once and then forget it. So I think it's part of that kind of ongoing thing that kind of Martin kind of said during his talk, is you've got to keep paying attention to it and keep kind of grooming it and making sure that it's in a good place.
I think, okay, so I'll confess I asked that question. I think the point is, thank you, Martin, for expressing very eloquently where information goes to die. Also, I think the question I had is, or the experience that, or the question I had further is, how do people actually find things, though, right? People can write very eloquently and very extensively and very appropriately, but the point is that the arrangement overhead it becomes overwhelming. So what have people's experience been there?
I don't know. The trouble with the wikis, they kind of organically grow, and even grooming them can be problematic. Like when you move the information around and breaking people's links, like when somebody once moved the run books, and we're like, going, where's the run books gone?
I think there are ways to use wikis that are a bit more useful, but for me, it's more like if it's living documentation, if it's stuff which you're constructing as a team for an actual purpose, whether that's, I don't know, tracking all the PII that you've found in a particular audit, if that's the focus of what you're doing. But I think there is space to have documentation which only has a limited lifespan, which effectively has a TTL and which can be sort of jettisoned after the fact. And then you don't care. It literally did go there to die. But yeah, I do admit it's very hard if you're going to spend time writing extensive documentation in the likes of Confluence and your little search box is completely inadequate for actually navigating and finding and such. But I don't think it's wholly useless.
Yeah,
All right.
personally, yeah, I agree. I don't find it wholly useless. I do find it, but I'm gonna stop there because we're running out of time.
Yes, we are. And thank you, Martin, Ali, Andy, and Adam. This was a great discussion. And thank you to everyone out there for joining us. Next week, we'll have our first in our series around security, how to build security instrumentation to automate AppSec testing and protection with Jeff Williams, CTO and co-founder of Contrast Security. Modern software demands velocity, and traditional outside-in scanning and firewalling are creating bottlenecks and slowing things down. In this talk, Jeff is going to approach application security from the inside out. Should be good, so go to our website, sign up, and we look forward to seeing you. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.